just completed a panel session on organizing your small business to make sure your rights are protected. There are certain benefits that you can offer as a solopreneur, entrepreneur, and a large business owner.
Well, welcome to part 2 of Power Breakfast and Conference. Each segment is on a specific topic that's very important for entrepreneurs and business owners. I'm excited about this panel today because this is key information. A lot of times it's things we forget about or say we'll get to later, but it's very important and it'll sneak up on you. One of my professors in school used to say, you spend all your time writing a business plan and all these contingencies and all these things for your business, and something that you didn't think of is what put you out of business. And a lot of times it's some of these things because you didn't plan in the beginning, to get all your administration and other things together. So, I think that we've got some great panelists, a great group, and I'm just going to let them kind of take the show. Where Tolliver's going to facilitate, master facilitator, interviewer, talk show a little bit. He's very talented.
Well, good morning, everyone. How are you?
Good morning.
Excuse me, I want the group that was in the other room. Good morning.
Good morning.
Wonderful, wonderful. Listen, we're going to have some fun today, right?
Yes.
Because usually what happens is when we're operating our businesses, because we're trying to meet timelines, we're trying to meet new clients, we're trying to hold on to the former clients or the existing clients. And so we get kind of like sometimes overwhelmed and stressed. But today, with the information that's going to be shared to you, we're going to minimize your stress and guarantee you're going to make some success. Is that good?
Yes.
Is that good?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Listen, we have some very unique professionals with us today. I'm telling you, we almost didn't make it because yesterday when we had our what we call our green room experience, that's when you do it right before the cameras, and it was just so phenomenal. I literally wanted to kind of tweet, and I don't even know how to do Twitter, but and LinkedIn or whatever, just to let you know, give you a prelude on what you're about to experience today. I encourage you to take copious notes today because the information that's going to be shared is really going to be something that you can take away with you and begin to implement right away. And with that, I'd like to do some, just introduce their names, and they're going to take a little 30 seconds, a little bit more than 20, just to tell you a little bit about them, and then we're going to go into the Q&A. Now, if you happen to have questions, and everybody say, I will. Okay, you will. I want you to jot them down as we go along, and then to prohibit us from breaking the flow of their presentation, we'll do a time for all the questions and answers. So just write down your question. If you want to, you can say, anybody remember that game show, The Dating Game? Contestant number 1. If you can't remember their name, just say contestant number 1, number 2, number 3. You got it? Okay, wonderful. So with that, we're fortunate to have sitting to my left, Mr. Mike Malyar. He is a suburban IP attorney. I'm adding on a little bit today, all right? But he's an IP attorney. He'll talk more about that. We have to make us all look good, Miss Lauren Day. She is a supplemental specialist with a company that has a dog called Aflac. And you'll be hearing more about her. I promise you, she will not quack. All right? So the third person we have is none other than the man to keep all your numbers together is Mr. Estevez. Can you give him a hand, please? Wonderful, wonderful. And the guy who's going to ask all the questions, my name is Willie. How are you? Okay, wonderful. Listen, we're going to be good. Would you all just start to just tell us a bit about yourself and why we need to listen attentively to you. So with that, Ms. Lauren, would you start us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Day. I represent Aflac.
I graduated from Syracuse University back in 2001. And for the past 8 years, I've been working with small to medium-sized businesses implementing voluntary benefits. And those benefits are designed to help the employees with the financial burden of going through, either an accident or a sickness, and a totally unexpected. So our benefits help out with the financial side of going through something unexpected. Thank you.
My name is Estevez, owner of Estevez Tax, and I've been in the accounting and finance game for about 10 years. I've been on my own for about a year, a little bit over, and I've dealt with companies as high as $500 million to the small 20,000 mom and pop, and I want to leverage their experiences to benefit you, and hopefully we can do that successfully.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll get right into our questions, and Eric, I'm going to start off with you. Whoa! See?
I'm too close, that's why.
That was a quiz. I told you you'd be mesmerized.
So I'm Mike Malyar. I'm an intellectual property attorney, so that's patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, that sort of work. We also do a bit of business counseling as well, but more so when it comes to IP. I started my career at Greenberg Traurig, which there's offices all around the world. I was there a couple of years, went off on my own. That was kind of tough, so I merged with a senior IP and business attorney. We've been doing this for a couple of years now. We're called Corner Counsel, and one of the things I like to do is work with small businesses and startups and just counsel them on how to best obtain IP rights, and also to make sure that they're not stepping on anybody's toes, all while working on a very limited budget. So.
Awesome. You good?
Everybody's
Eric, what are some of the common problems that you see with small businesses?
Well, with small businesses, a lot of times their financial systems aren't really in order. The number one thing I see is their banking is not right. There's a lot of personal expenses being paid out of the business, or business being paid out of personal expenses. I'm sure this gentleman knows exactly what I'm talking about, the banker. You should definitely have a conversation with him. That's one of the things I do. I organize your business, and a lot of the problems are very common. So that's how you can really, that's one of the first things I would say you need to get right when you're starting a business. Small businesses seem to have that problem very commonly.
So with that, because a lot of times a person may have a hobby and think it's a business, how do you suggest that they distinguish between transitioning from what is a hobby that they may have a lot of passion for versus what's a legitimate business?
I think you have to be clear about your goals. Even if it's a hobby, you still probably want to measure your performance, know where the money's going. And I would have a separate bank account, even just for a hobby, to be honest.
Oh, okay.
Because that's going to, a lot of times, being disorganized in your business flows into your personal.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know how much to pay yourself. You don't know what you're spending on what. That's the whole point of my bookkeeping side of my business, is just knowing what you're doing, measuring your progress, which is very important for a small business.
So, Mike, if we could follow up, let's say, for instance, we have this business, we just gung-ho about it, we went and got the name incorporated, and we discovered that it's recorded that someone else has a similar name. How important what you do will help minimize that infringement?
Right. So that's a good question. First, I want to just say two separate things. Just because you incorporate your business name doesn't mean you have a trademark on it. Right? You have to use that name as a trademark in order to gain trademark rights. But to your second point, if somebody already has your mark, then if you're doing the same thing, then they probably win, right? I mean, there might be some other factors involved that you might win the day at the end, but it's unlikely. But more important than that, the takeaway is that you should start early, similar with the finance planning, to understand what you can protect and to go out and obtain it. So for instance, in that case, what you would want to do is do a search of the trademark databases and make sure nobody else already has that mark. Like, that's pretty simple to do, it's pretty easy, and it gives you a very clear idea of what's out there, especially for trademarks.
So IP is, you can explain that for us, please?
Right, so that's a broad question. IP, intellectual property, it's a property right in something intangible, like an idea or a brand or an artistic work, something like that. And there are ways to acquire these rights. Normally there's a process to file with like the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and there's the Copyright Office as well. But all of these can be used to protect your business, various aspects of your business, and should be thought of that way.
So I've been in business for 3 years, 7 years, maybe even 12 years. Do I really need a patent or to get the right to maybe sell an invention?
No, so that's a pretty big misconception, just among laymen and also other attorneys as well, is that a patent doesn't give you a right to do anything. A patent, instead, the patent is a negative right. It gives you the right to stop others from making and using your product. So what's the practical effect of this? What you were saying. You can enter the market without having a patent. That's one side. On the other side, just because you have a patent doesn't mean you get to practice what you patented, right? It doesn't mean whatever your product you patented, you can just go and sell. There might be other people out there with their own patent rights that you would infringe on if you were to make and use your product. So it's important to understand that there's risk always when you're coming out with a product or doing anything in like a business space. And when you do your due diligence early, it's a good way to kind of minimize or reduce that risk.
So, Eric, we talked about some of the problems that you see with businesses. What are some of the key questions that entrepreneurs, small business owner, maybe even you mentioned the depth of some of the companies you've been able to deal with, companies that may have more than 100 employees. What are some of the questions that they should bring about to you, or maybe even consider being a business? Yeah,
well, I think that one large problem, just really in our country, is financial literacy. A lot of people just don't understand. By show of hands, who's ever taken a personal finance class in school? Elementary, high school? About seven people, maybe, and that's just one class. I think that needs to be a broader thing in our education system. But the way that relates to your question is that a lot of business owners aren't educated on what a deduction is, what a write-off is. So that's one of the preliminary questions they should ask. What is going to be a beneficial write-off? What qualifies as a business deduction? And we can go from there.
Lauren, I worked with corporate America. My health insurance was always provided, or they took a little bit out of my salary. I'm now in business. There's no parent company sponsoring me, giving me a benefits portfolio, or letting me know, here's your health insurance, here's how many days you could take off, here's your vacation time to be with us 4 years, we'll give you 3 weeks. Can you kind of maybe just talk the distinction between the health insurance and why that's important to understand the difference between corporate America and being on your own?
Sure. Well, corporate America, when we refer to that, we sometimes think bigger company, maybe above 50 people. And in the small business market, you're starting out maybe with yourself and another person, maybe you get up to 3 to 5 people. So there are different participation requirements when a business is looking into offering benefits. So when you're talking larger company, there are often contributions from the business owner down to the employee. Now, when you're dealing with a small business and you're looking at something like a medical insurance or a supplemental benefit, people like myself exist, right? I am an expert, I guess you could call it, or an advocate for small businesses, where I have resources that I can advise a smaller business on how to gain access to medical insurance. Now, maybe there won't be a contribution, or maybe they figure out a way to contribute as far as giving people, you know, a traditional raise versus benefit raise, right? So you're getting compensated in benefits versus financial. And you know, that there's a lot of options available for small businesses. The best thing to do is meet with, you know, somebody like myself to go through the statistics of your business, to be able to come up with some solutions that are tailored to you.
So if I do a follow-up question to that, my business is too small.
Your business is too small, there's no such thing. So, okay, so elaborate.
Yes, please.
Sure. Okay, so is my business too small? The answer is no, and yes in some cases. So it depends on what we're looking at. Now, for instance, the company Aflac that I represent, if you're a traditional business and you're looking for traditional product, you need 3 people to participate. Now, if we're looking into the market and you're working with a market expert that actually knows different carriers, there really is no participation requirement. So the answer is no, your business is definitely not too small to offer benefits.
So, Mike, I'm in business and I want to minimize my output. In other words, cut my costs.
Okay.
Startups are sharp, thrifty, many business owners as DIY, do it yourself.
Right.
So, and they have a lot of books, you know, things of that nature. Why is it important to have professional consultants like yourself to
Right.
be a part of the team?
Right. Okay, so that's a great question, because I see this all the time. You know, people try to do as much as they can, or business owners try to do as much as they can. And it makes sense up to a point, right? Because IP itself is really complex. You know, schooling takes forever, and then you need experience before you even know what you're doing. And it's a challenge to really navigate for anybody. And the reason it's really risky in IP for small business owners, and just that anybody in general to do their own work, is that you can really shoot yourself in the foot. Especially like with a patent, sometimes with a trademark, you can lose rights based on what you disclose and what you do. In fact, there's a way that even your own work, your own disclosure, right, can be a bar to yourself in the future. Like you can actually stop yourself from getting a patent right or something like that. So it's very important to understand that the more you do yourself, even though in some situations it may be required, is that you're taking on more risk. You know, more risk that down the road you might not be covered properly, or the IP rights that you think you have, you actually don't have. Which in some situations is actually worse than not having any IP rights at all, because you might make business decisions based on thinking, oh, I have a patent. You know, I'm going to go talk to this competitor and tell him, you know, to stop doing that. And I'm going to incur money, time, and expense in doing all of this, when at the end of the day, you really have nothing.
So how do I avoid infringing upon someone else's patent and someone else infringing upon mine?
Right, due diligence. You know, that's the answer to that. You do your searching early on, and there are professional companies that do that. Then when you get the result from those companies, you have an IP attorney, a competent IP attorney, not necessarily me, just somebody, to look it over and to provide an opinion based on whether or not, say, if you're looking for clearance, whether you're okay to sell your product. You'll look at patents similar to what you're doing, and then an attorney can tell you whether or not your product is going to infringe that patent. On the flip side, if you're trying to generate, say, a patent, you do a search to see if it's been done before. You know, this way, if you find out it's been done, you find out you're not going to get a patent at the end of the day, you can forego that expense right off the bat. You know, so it's really important to do the due diligence early before you start expending, you know, time and resources, and at the end of the day, you might not.
You mentioned that it's a possibility in the future we could infringe upon our own patent. So I'm posting on Facebook, putting articles on LinkedIn. How does intellectual property protection concerns factor there?
So for what I was referring to before, the way you can kind of shoot yourself in the foot with a patent is you tell the world somehow what you're doing. You know, if your product has something unique that you think is patentable, if you tell somebody what it is, like that's a disclosure. And in the U.S., the U.S. is kind of generous. They give you a 1-year grace period from your disclosure to file something, like file either a provisional or a utility patent application, something like that, to start protecting your rights. But once that year has gone, if you haven't filed anything, then that's it. Your own disclosure is going to be, is going to be an obstacle to yourself. You're going to need to be able to get around that somehow in the future. And if you just told everybody what your product is, you're not going to be able to do that.
So Eric, in line with have my patent, structuring my business, Lauren mentioned about we're not too small to start considering factoring benefits. What would you say could be a threat to, like, we use the term mom and pop shops, that solopreneur, that entrepreneur, that don't have maybe the 3 employees? What are some of the concerns there?
You're saying what are the threat to the small businesses
Yes.
in
operating? In other words, here's the big corporations that may provide some similar types of service. So the small businesses in that space. So what are some of the concerns? Would they have or maybe they're none?
Right, no, I think that the small business has the advantage of the client relation, the personal relationship, more flexibility to change terms in business, to tailor a deal, tailor a service to a particular person than the big conglomerates. So I think small business will always have an edge in innovation as far as client relations go.
So with that, Lauren, it was mentioned earlier in a previous presentation about here's this one key employee. They're like the bread and butter of our company. What do we do? What do you suggest we do to retain that person or to acquire good quality talent?
Trusted employees. Well, I mentioned before the difference between financial compensation and compensation via benefits. That's a trend that I'm noticing happening more and more, especially with small businesses. Because when you really look at the average raise of what an employee would gain, it's almost sometimes unfortunately laughable when you're given maybe a $200 a year raise. And so what I'm noticing is to maintain these trusted, loyal employees, that the business owner can decide to maybe put a key man life insurance program in place or purchase a voluntary life insurance plan for everybody instead of giving them that cash benefit, which if they are given a raise, that raises their workers' comp, that raises their payroll tax, right? But if they are buying a benefit for their employees or their key employees, that now becomes a tax write-off for the business, as well as, look, guys, here, we're doing something for you. We are making sure that you have life insurance.
So, Eric, let's follow up with that question. So, in other words, I'm providing these benefits. How should I position them on my books if I'm not giving salary, but I'm giving benefits?
Well, I confirm everything she says is true. It is a tax deduction. Exactly. Life insurance is tricky with tax deduction, but like you said,
like an accident plan or
exactly. As long as it's not benefiting the owner, you can take it as a tax deduction. So she's 100% right. Those type of decisions normally I get in the tax planning stage. They want to know, hey, if I do make this key man life insurance, what is that difference going to be? So I would say before those decisions are made, meet with your tax advisor, understand what that true cost is, because that upfront cost might not be the actual true cost.
Okay. So, given that, I'm looking for as many tax deductions as possible. Can I be a key person? In other words, I own the company. The bank's really going to look at my relationship. So on paper, would I qualify as a key person?
No, I don't think you would, because if you own the company, so you'd be benefiting from that life insurance. And typically, and this is a very fickle with the tax law, typically if that's the case, it's not a tax deduction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, folks.
Willie's gone for the day. He's gotta go take a break.
Lock the doors. All right, Eric. Mike, let's follow up with that.
Okay.
Eric is taking away a lot of my benefits. Lauren is trying to give me some benefits.
Okay.
So help me out with this patent. There was some time ago, and I don't know how many in our audience recall, when they said if you had an idea, type it out, write it out, put it in an envelope, mail it to yourself, and just never open the envelope. Is that a myth, or is that something real?
Yeah, that's a bit of a myth. I mean, it's a great idea, but
But it has 1963 and the same stamp, and it's never been the seal has never been broken.
Right.
The glue is still glue. So
you've got all of that. But no. So recently, about 6 years ago, they changed the law to better align with foreign patent agencies, where it doesn't matter who invents first. What matters is that you get to the patent office first. So it's a first to file system. And actually, to change that a little bit around, it's a first inventor to file, which means you get that 1 year grace period, which I mentioned before. But essentially, it's still like a race to the patent office. And nowadays, like, there is sort of that rush. If that's an idea that you think has commercial value, then it's something to move on pretty quickly, because every day you delay is more chance that somebody else is going to come in and do something.
So I use my business trade name, and when I advertise my business, how can I get my TM or trademark or that fancy little signal that I've been looking on the computer trying to find?
That's a hard symbol to find. It takes forever. Right. So there's different types of trademark protection. So just by using your business name as a trademark, you're gaining common law rights. So you have that to fall back on. Now, the issue with common law rights is it's very easy to acquire. You don't have to file anything, you don't have to do anything. But it's only as good as the region in which you're using it. So if you're a service-oriented business and you only work in like Newark, New York City, or something like that, your trademark then is only good in that region. Whereas if you seek federal trademark registration, which is also possible on the trade name, that would give you protection throughout the U.S. And the challenge with that, though, is especially when you're using a name, if you're a service-oriented business and your business is your name, there might be other people out there already with your name. If you're a John Smith, there might be a John Smith doing something similar somewhere else, and they might have had the same idea you did and went and filed a trademark, and then you using that mark is going to potentially infringe their mark.
We talked earlier.
Yep.
Anybody remember, there's a company, they didn't pay me for advertising, but it's called 7-Up. Here's this business owner, have 7 children, and they decide, I want to put the business in all of my children's name, but that's impossible. So I'll just call my company the 7-Ups. Can we use that name?
So probably not. So there are two parts of this question. One is whether there's another similar mark out there, whether you can do something similar. And that depends. It's always a case-by-case basis, but it depends how similar the marks are. In this case, it's pretty close. And it's also depending on how similar the goods are, plus some other factors, but those are the two most important. So if you're doing something with that mark in a completely different realm, then you might have an argument that you'd be entitled to the trademark, because a consumer is not going to see the mark and think they're the same entity, and that's really the gold standard in trademark. But the problem with that, the second part, is that there is what is known as famous marks. McDonald's arches, the Nike swoosh, these are all famous. And if you're using something similar to a famous mark, the goods don't matter as much, right? They see the similarity between the marks, and then there's issues. So to answer that question altogether, I don't think that that's a good idea just because of that, because it's a famous mark.
Okay, all right, we're feeling a little bit better.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not doing my job.
well, let me ask you this. Bill Gates started Microsoft, but he didn't name the company Bill Gates, but he has a foundation.
Right.
each and every one of us, we have a name on an official document called birth certificate.
Right.
What type of rights would you say we have? I mean, we didn't quite talk about this in depth, but what kind of rights would we have as far as name protection, being that patent, trademark?
Right. So that would be more so a trademark because it would be your brand, but you don't get protection in the name. It's not just the name, divorced from everything else. It's your name next to your goods or your services, you know, what you're offering, what your product is. So from that standpoint, your name alone doesn't do anything, but your name selling, you know, widgets, well, that's something that you can protect. And there's also other requirements, legal requirements from the patent office, but for the most part, like if you have that, then you can file.
Okay, all right. We got the trademark down, we got the TN. Oh, what about a license?
License. Okay. Well, that's very important, and that in some aspects is why you get why people obtain patent rights is to be able to license their work. But essentially, so putting it into context, if you had some sort of IP right and you saw somebody infringing, say it's a patent. Now, patent litigation is extremely expensive. It's not something you ever want to get involved in. So, in order to avoid a patent litigation, you know, parties settle all the time. And part of that settlement usually includes some kind of license with a royalty to use, say, that patent. So, in that sense, thinking about your IP protection should also factor in, you know, potential settlements, potential disputes. And then on the flip side, which may also be pretty important, is that if you're in a space and there's somebody else with some sort of IP rights that's similar to yours, and you might infringe, they might come after you. So you sort of want to, back to that due diligence thing, is kind of plan for this, maybe set some money aside as you're growing your business, just in case that person comes after you. You've got some money to spend on legal, on the license, on whatever it is. You know, you've got something, so you're not like caught with your pants down. You know, because that's a problem.
Okay. So Warren, my business is growing. Where do I go from here? You know, I have more than us four no more. We're really a real company now. We're 10 employees, we're 20 employees, we're 50 employees or on.
It's amazing.
Why are you so valuable to us?
Well, you know, obviously the bigger you grow, the more you want to build a staff of trusted employees. And so, you know, back 10 years ago, people expected for the full boat of benefits to be provided to them. Now things are different, especially with the Affordable Care Act happening, where, you know, cost sharing has taken place. So most of the small to medium-sized businesses, in order to compete with the larger businesses, are offering some form of either, if they're not offering medical insurance, they're offering someone like myself, or it doesn't have to be me again, like you said. It's just someone, an advocate, a person, an advisor, somebody that these people can go to and say, look, I need medical insurance, the company doesn't provide it, what can you do, how can you help me? Or vice versa, if the company does provide their medical insurance, in the small to medium market space, usually the business owner, the HR representatives, they're just tapped out. They have so much work, they're doing 3 people's jobs, and so benefits just sort of take a back seat. And that's really unfortunate. And so that's, again, why people like myself exist. It's to step in and actually act as a third-party benefit advisor so that they can take that off of their plate, trust me, to advise their employees on how to use their medical insurance and then how to supplement the out-of-pocket costs that the medical insurance leaves you with. Okay.
No, please.
I was just going to mention, as well as income protection, you know, because that's important too. You know, if you don't protect your income and something happens, what ends up usually happening is the employee will go to that business owner or HR person and say, I'm in a lot of trouble. Can I have a loan? Can I have advanced pay, whatever the case is.
Let's kind of go to Eric right there. Lauren, I want to come back.
Sure.
That scenario. There was no, you mentioned earlier about proper planning. There was no procedures, no systems in place to factor what happens if, doesn't have necessarily be the key employee, but just be one of the frontline type persons. How does that factor in now? If an employer says, I like you, we have good relationships, you've been good to my company, I'll just write you a check out of petty cash.
Okay. How does that affect the business?
Yes. And the employee.
Just writing a check out of petty cash as far as compensation, it's still a write-off. It's still a compensation to your employee that will be a tax deduction. Anything that you're spending on your business will eventually be a tax deduction with a couple caveats, but for sure you could write that off if that's what you're asking.
I'm gonna push down a little bit.
Please do.
Petty cash, regards to what the size of the check. The employee receives that amount of money, $100, $1,000. How does it impact the employee then?
The employee will have
Because
to
it didn't come from my salary.
It didn't come from the salary, but it's still income, and it is for sure taxable income, and they'll have to show that on their Form 1040 as either other income or business income. In some point, it's probably other income.
If it's a loan,
If it's a loan, it's different. If it's a loan, now we have something else going on. It's probably not gonna be taxable income if it's a loan. But to the business, they might be able to write off maybe some sort of expense of that loan. The person, not so much.
so Lauren, we talked to our tax advisor. We think we can handle the need for the benefit. We understand the concept. So how do we fulfill the need with benefits? Or what type of benefits would be recommended in this scenario to avoid?
They're having to,
Yes.
yeah, because what that does then is set a precedent for everybody. Now everybody thinks that if something happens, they can go and ask for a loan. So what we try to avoid is that exact situation. And so, the ideal benefit package is a medical insurance plan, depending on who you have, your demographic of employees. If they use the doctor a lot and they tend to have some health issues, a lower deductible plan would be ideal. If you have a younger staff, you want to give options. You want to give younger people who don't frequent the doctor, who are 26 to 30 years old, the higher deductible plan. And trends are showing that I believe it's about 78% of employees, once presented with an option to now help out with that medical insurance out of pocket, will explore their options and self-fund it on their own. So there's the medical insurance plan, and then what AFLAC does is a supplemental benefit that pays our policyholders cash. So medical insurance, real quick, just 2 seconds, pays doctors and hospitals. Okay, AFLAC or any company out there that provides supplemental benefits, we put money in our policyholders' pockets above and beyond medical insurance so that they can use any way they need to use it. And that also correlates back to income protection. One of the most important things, I believe, as a business, if you are going to, run your business, grow your business, keep your employees, you should offer a disability plan to supplement what the state of New Jersey pays. So altogether, you have the medical, supplemental, maybe some vision and dental.
So Mike, we understand the tax consequences for both the employer and employee. We realize that we can minimize the negative impact on our paycheck or on the payroll or overall balance sheet.
Right.
So as a business owner, and Lauren brought something out, once you start it with one employee, because what's going to usually happen is they're going to talk to somebody else. Myron, I got the best boss. This person, they just, when I was stranded, I just went to them and because of my relationship, they told me they was proud of me and they wrote a check for me and told me, don't worry about it. Don't tell nobody. How many know they're going to tell somebody? Somebody's going to be in the restroom, water cooler, somewhere and talk about what just occurred. What type of document would you recommend be in place to make certain that that doesn't occur? Because it's going to hit eyewitness news.
Yeah, once you let something like that out, it's everywhere. In that situation, what you want is an NDA, like a non-disclosure agreement or confidentiality agreement. They're essentially the same thing. And you want your employee to sign that, and you would have to tailor it right to that employee, to that situation. Because there's a common misconception that you just pull an NDA and like that will work for any situation, but that's very far from the truth, because in each NDA you have to describe what the confidential information is. You have to start marking that information confidential. You have to like put penalties on the other person or whoever, both parties maybe, because there's some NDAs that are bilateral. It's not just one way. So what are the penalties? How long does this last? Because you're not going to keep information confidential forever. So in that situation, that's what you would want. You would want to protect yourself that way.
So what if the potential business partners, employee, investors are not in agreement to signing an NDA? What happens in that scenario?
Right. So if there's no way to entice this person to sign it, there's nothing you can offer that makes sense to you to get them to sign, then you're going to have to proceed without it. But at that point, you have to understand, again, the risk. You're taking on additional risk at that point, because maybe that business partner, whoever, is going to go and talk about it. And at that point, what can you do to stop them? So if you think about the risk early, you start planning ways around it. Maybe you don't disclose everything. So in a different setting, that NDA sort of setting, but if you're trying to find investors or you're trying to sell your business to somebody, you have to tell them something about your business. So maybe if you just manipulate what you say, hold some stuff back if they're not going to sign an NDA, something like that. But you would have to work it, understanding that there's additional risk in that setting.
Okay. We're going to open the floor for additional questions. So if you have a question, we ask that you just kind of hold your hand up high so we can see you clear, and then we'll take it. But let me just do a little disclaimer. All the questions or comments has to be related to the subject matter at hand, so that we can maintain quality control. Fair? Right. And then whatever question you have or comment, if you can keep it 2 minutes, if possible. I mean, if there's like a comma and you got to add one more word, we can work with that. But I'm 6'1" and I stand up. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Lorana Edwards, and I'm a business consultant. I just had a general question regarding to trademark and copyrights.
Okay.
How does that relate to, or can you talk about what are, I guess I would say, how does that relate to when the music industry, they have these rappers, they have people who, do anything from sampling music, sampling verses, and so on.
Right.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that would probably be mostly a copyright thing, because that's an artistic work. So a song, music, that sort of stuff, like that's copyright protectable. And in those situations, whoever comes up with the music, the song, the rap song, they're going to own the copyright to that work, right? If somebody is going to sample their music, then they're going to be essentially infringing that copyright. Normally in those settings, there's licenses or agreements in place, because you can only, if you sample too much, then it's going to be copyright infringement. So in those settings, what that's called is a derivative work. Like, you're changing something that's been copyrighted, you're taking something that's been copyrighted, and turning it into something new, but there's still elements of what was there before. So the work before is still copyrighted by whoever created it. Then what you created, the new stuff, that's yours. You own the copyright to that. But then that portion, is still there. So it's kind of a delicate field.
So the person who created the new work, they would have to pay that person who they took the work from originally.
They would have to agree with that. Whether that involves a payment, maybe they reach out to that person and they're like, no, great, I love your work, just take it. That could work too. But there should be certainly some sort of agreement memorializing that, especially if it's one of those, yeah, go ahead, go for it. Because that, if it's a verbal agreement, if 2 years later that person says, oh wait, I never gave you permission, then how are you going to prove that they did, right? So have agreements in place to that.
We're going to go to the young lady in the corner, then John.
Sharon Salazar, Mr. Megan. Related to her question, you mentioned and gave the example of the myth of the government copyright. Can you talk a little bit more about how to protect written works?
Okay, so for written works, it's going to be a copyright protection, right? Now, for copyrights, just putting down your work, like writing down your words, or if it's music, writing that down on a sheet of paper, like some sort of physical medium, even a CD, something like that, you gain a copyright automatically, like you don't have to do anything else. The reason to register, to go to the Copyright Office and register a copyright on that, is it gives you additional benefits to that. Like first, you can't enforce your copyright, like you can't sue somebody in court without having a registration in place. So you might want to reach out to somebody you think is using your work. If, let's say you have a copyright and you didn't register it yet, you might want to reach out to them and say, listen, I did this first, you're copying my work, stop or pay me or whatever you want to say there. But then understand that if they say no, or if they push back, or what have you, then what's your next step, right? Are you going to go to court? Are you going to leave it alone? If you're going to go to court, then maybe before you even reach out to them, you want to file a registration, because it takes like 3 to 6 months on the copyright. They're kind of quick. Maybe actually no, it's like 9 months. You can speed it up. You can pay a little bit extra to get it between 3 and 6 months. But still, you want that in place before you ever file a suit. So,
How do you then, in this digital age where folks are publishing blogs and publishing their works on the internet, how do you then protect, or how does a copyright infringement case evolve in using technology?
right, that's a really good question. That's an enforcement issue, right? How do you know if somebody's infringing your rights? Whether it's a trademark, patent, copyright, you need to see it happen. Right? And there are services out there, the third-party services, like we don't do this, but who will police your mark or your copyright or what have you. They'll go search around, they'll make sure that nobody's using it. So to do that, you would have to either engage those people or maybe on your own, do your own searching, do your own due diligence and try to find whether or not it's being used. But essentially those are your only ways to do it.
It's my responsibility.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you're a small business and you have, let's say, less than 10 employees or so. The state just signed paid sick leave, so everybody has to have that. How do you manage that? Because it seems like you could really get taken advantage of. Oh, I'm sick today, you got to let me off.
How do you manage basically?
What do you put in place to manage that? Because it needs to be managed.
With that kind of stuff, that's kind of the payroll side of things, time and expense monitoring. So getting a good payroll service on your side could for sure help. It's really as simple as that, and they'll have all the systems in place to monitor all of that. They'll have online portals that let's just say that your employees can see how much time they have left, and you can have access to that as well. Make sure nothing's out of balance.
But also, in a sense of, as an owner of the policies that you need to put in, I mean, the state says you get this much time for this much time, or I can't remember exactly what it is, but how do you not have people take advantage of that? Because you've got to run your business, you want people to be it, you don't want them to get sick, but at the same time, you don't want, you get into the second half of the year and all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people are out sick because it's summer or whatever.
Friday.
Would an employee handbook facilitate that?
You know what? Honestly, speaking kind of off the cuff, for sure that could facilitate it. But I think a lot of the workplace is moving away from those defined figures, and I think to retain talent today, it's got to go that way. That seems to be kind of an older way of business. So with the new options of, hey, listen, here's an honor system, don't take advantage. It'll be clear when they're taking advantage, to be honest, and that is appealing to young talent to not have to say, oh, you know what, I got 2 more sick days. Let me just say I'm sick because I'm going to the beach, all that kind of stuff. Everybody's going to do it. There's really no way to keep track of that, to be honest. But I think that's just kind of an off the cuff answer.
So Mike, you said that you can have patent a private invention if you have shown publicly.
Right.
But what type of investigation about the Trademark and Patent Office made about your product during the patent process? And my second question is, if you create a product, I'm an inventor, if you create a product and you upgrade or modify its design, how does that affect the patent process?
Okay, so can you repeat the second part of that question? I missed
Okay, so
something.
the first one is you said that you cannot patent a private invention if you
Right.
have shown it publicly.
Right.
What type of investigation does the patent office make exactly?
Right, so for that question, the patent office doesn't really search for your physical disclosures. Like if you're going to sell your product, that counts as a disclosure. They're not going to know that. The issue there is that maybe you've sold your product, maybe you're not entitled to a patent, but you go through the patent process, the examiner doesn't know about this, so it gives you a patent. Now you have this patent. 5 years down the road, you find a competitor that's doing what you think is covered by your patent. So you go after them, and this is what I was saying before, is sometimes it's worse to have bad IP than not have IP at all, because now you've reached out to this competitor based on the idea that you have a valid patent. Now, you get into a patent litigation, you're going to have patent attorneys who are going to be looking into this. They're going to investigate very hard, because that's their job. They're going to find this. They're going to find your sale, and then they're just going to blow up your whole argument. And now you've spent all that money, and you have nothing for it. And in fact, you've lost the patent right that might have been like a marketing tool or something else for you. So that's where that's an issue. That's why you don't want to kind of lie to the patent office in that sense. And then
And the second question
second one.
is when you create a product and you upgrade or modify this design, how does that affect the patent
Okay.
process? Because I know that there's many coffee brands, there's many different type of products out there.
Right.
And, yeah.
So from a patent procurement standpoint, if you're trying to get your own patent and you're a little different from somebody else, depending on how the magnitude of that difference will decide whether or not you'll get a patent on it. Because that's how innovation has gone since the dawn of time. Everybody come up with something, somebody else does a little bit more, like black and white TV and color TV. That's a great example. So in that sense, the person who patented the color TV over the black and white TV, they got a patent on it because that was a significant difference. It was a patently distinct difference. So in that sense, like it's a case-by-case basis, but there's a chance that your modification might get that. And then from the flip side, on the infringement side, if somebody else has a patent and you have something modified, then you go through the process and a court is going to have to interpret the claim. So at the back of your patent, the value of what you can protect with that patent is the claims, the last section of it. So a court is going to interpret what that means, then they're going to take that meaning and they're going to compare the product or whatever it is to that. And if it has all of the elements of what was claimed in that patent, then it's going to infringe. So that's a due diligence effort, because that's when you look at the patent. You hire somebody to look at the patent, look at the product, and then provide a professional opinion about whether or not this would be an infringement risk in the future. That's one way to combat the risk, is that can happen.
Yes, thank you.
I'd like to direct my question to Mike. So let's just say I'm a creative artist and designer, and I'm into the fashion industry. So now I'm trying to develop my brand. I locked down my name, I got my trademark going, and so now I'm developing and I'm doing creative design work. Let's just say I use Polo.
Okay.
Or some other designer, or Champions sweatshirts and hoodies. And I'm taking my brand name and now I'm developing this design on their hoodies or their sweatshirts, and I'm selling it at a higher markup price. So I'm doing Vans sneakers and I'm doing this creative artwork on these Vans. And now I'm doubling or tripling the price and I'm putting them back on the market. Am I infringing upon that known brand, and what are the repercussions behind it? Because I see a lot of small artists and they're trying to brand themselves as designers in the market and fashion industry. It's a very competitive industry.
Right.
But when you're a little guy just trying to break into the industry, you have to have something really creative to catch the eye of your target market.
Right.
So what are the repercussions behind that?
Right. So there's There's a lot of nuance to that question. To the first question, again, it's case by case basis, but one of the questions would be, is the polo mark shown or the Vans mark shown? Like, if somebody were to look at that, when they see Vans, that's a problem. Because now you're taking what their goods are and trying to make more money on it. That you can't do.
Okay.
If you start with a polo or a hoodie or something general like that with no markings and then put your mark on it, like that would be okay? Sometimes. So, similar to Trademark, there's something called trade dress, which is, it's kind of the same thing, but it protects a different thing. So, I mean, this is going back a while, but when Frazier first came out with Nexi, it was purple. All of it was purple, right? And they did that enough that the consumer started to relate purple to Nexi, right? So that was trade dress for the purple. Now, if you're using a Vans shoe and you look at the shoe without even seeing the logo, but you can tell it's Vans, then that's trade dress, and that would be usurping that. To your second question, why is this a risk? Now, when you're the little guy, you might be able to do this without catching the attention of the big guy, and you'd be okay. But understand that that's creating a risk. If you grow to the point where you start being more than just a blip on their radar, they start seeing you, you're taking market share from them. They're gonna come after you. And if you don't have anything in place, you haven't done your due diligence, then you're in trouble. So my suggestion in this sort of realm, if you're not going to try to design around anybody's IP rights, then understand that there's a risk and to start putting money away early on. It's like a royalty cushion, because if you do grow to that point and they come after you, then you're gonna need that budget. So that's another way to deal with that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yep, okay. I have two questions. The first one's really quick. So I'm hearing IP and patent being used interchangeably. Is intellectual property and patent the same thing, or I understood it to be different?
So I'm sorry if I was making that.
That's okay. I was hearing it that way.
It's just a form of IP. So IP is patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, stuff like that.
Right.
So
That's why I used it.
yeah,
Okay.
it's
All right.
it's a
So
form
my
of-
second question. So we got that second question, and building upon the question the lady asked me back about the written materials. So I design training programs. So I know putting copyright on there gives it a general protection.
Yeah.
But because I do design training programs, is it more advisable to get a formal copyright on that because it goes into different corporations and it's internet and that type of thing, and it's really specific?
Yeah, I mean, if you can afford it, then it's always the right way to go to acquire the IP rights, the actual registrations or issue patent or whatever it is. Now with the copyright, it's actually pretty straightforward. You can do that on your own, and the filing fee for that is $55, which is really modest compared to like patents and trademarks. So that would be something I would advise. Yeah, go get copyright on it. But back to what you're saying, designing the training materials. Copyright only protects the artistic work. It doesn't protect the functional information that you're providing, right?
Okay.
So what a copyright is going to protect in your training presentation is the organization, maybe how you convey
The
the thoughts.
message.
Exactly. It's not the message itself. It's how you're going to go about conveying that message. Yeah.
If you have an initial registration for copyright, which I have, but since that time I've tweaked the information, updated, made some changes, added, do I need to update the copyright, or is there a whole new copyright procedure?
So it would depend on how drastic of a change it is. If it's something that it's a new work where it'd be considered like a derivative work, because you can have derivative works of your own work, like that's fine. You're just not infringing your own copyright. But yeah, I mean, if you want, I can help you with that. No, but if you were going to go do that and the copyright is significantly different, or the new work is significantly different, where it should be protected by a new copyright, there's no mechanism to update copyrights. You would file a new one. But again, considering that the fee is $55 versus like $225 for a trademark or $900 for a patent, like it's kind of modest. So if you change it enough, I would say file a new one. Yeah.
Yes.
First, I just want to thank Mike for sort of clarifying the NDA situation. I
Okay.
send them out all the time.
Okay.
Very general. I didn't realize that I actually need to put something in
Oh,
there
yeah.
that's specific. It's good to know. And the and market is confidential. Very good to know. But that's not my question. Here's my question. I have a client who desires to infringe upon copyright.
Okay.
It is a software that they want to copy. What would be the best way for them to copy that software and not end up in court?
I'm not sure I'm even legally allowed to.
Everybody turn your phone off.
I get that question on taxes all the time.
Yeah. Not my legal advice, but no. If you start with the idea, and if they were to change it enough that it wasn't, and the standard in copyright law is substantially similar, right? If it's not
Substantially what?
similar.
Awesome.
So, and this is a legal standard. So there's all sorts of case law and decision making about what that means, because that's a really subjective term. But if in their situation they were to change it enough that it wasn't considered substantially similar, then they'd probably be okay. With a copyright, it's also kind of a weak protection for that exact reason. You can only protect what you have and maybe a little bit more of the substantially similar stuff. Like a patent's your strongest, because if you're doing what's claimed in the patent, it doesn't matter who you are. You could be in a completely different industry with a completely different product, but if it has the same elements that you have in the patent, then you can stop that as well. So, that's sort of the flip side.
One last question? Yes.
Eric, a lot of people that I know just started a small business are because they want to take care of themselves, they want the business to pay their personal, and you mentioned earlier that that's not always how it goes. But I wanted to know, so if that person cannot take a big loan and want to start a small business, what sources would you recommend before they can go on that road? As a financial advisor, what would you say first so they won't, they will sustain themselves at the beginning of their small business?
Well, I would say if that's the road they want to go without a loan or a lot of risk, the best business you can start, in my opinion, is a high margin, low cost service business. Because really and we were just talking about this, really what that's going to cost is your time. So for instance, my type of business, tax preparation, that's really mostly my time. It doesn't cost me anything to do a tax return. Maybe a small marginal cost of a program, and I don't really need an office, have one, don't really need one. So my risk is either I don't get clients or I do. So if you don't have a lot of money to put up, I would say a service business. Does that answer your question? Is that what you were looking for? A little bit? Okay.
All of your questions were very good, and what I recommend, based on the type of quality questions that you have, to make arrangements to consult with each of these professionals here, because some of your situation may be personal to your type of business, because I can tell some of you were going to open a refrigerator and throw it up, but you decided it may be copyright protected. So we want to make sure you're covered on that end. But I'd like to ask Eric and Lauren and Mike if you would give us some closing comments that you'd like to leave with our audience.
So I would say in closing that IP is a part of your business, just like everything else. Just like finance, HR, regulatory. Legal's in there, and within legal is IP, and it's important to treat it that way. Don't neglect it. Do your due diligence early. Try to investigate what areas of your business you can protect, and go and try to obtain that protection early. And on the flip side, do your due diligence to make sure you're not infringing anybody's codes. Search around on your own, maybe engage other people to help you search. That will help reduce the risk. But understand that when IP becomes a problem, it's probably too late. And that's why you just don't want to skimp. You don't want to marginalize the experience either. And you want to just get professional work and make sure you're protected.
Thank you. Lauren?
Right. My advice would be to take the proactive approach when dealing with employee benefits. So if you're just starting a business, consider it one of the main pillars of how your business is going to function, employee satisfaction, rather than taking a reactive approach. The reactive approach is where, you have a key employee coming to you saying, I'm disabled and can no longer come to work. What do you have in place to help me? Or why is my medical insurance out of pocket the cost $5,000? I can't afford this. So would you rather be that business owner that is proactive, has these plans in place, has a trusted advisor, can go and get information as needed, or would you rather be that business owner that is the reactive person? So that's my advice. And if anybody needs anything, my contact information is in the brochure, so feel free, reach out anytime.
I'm going to build on actually what they both just said. If you want to be proactive, because a lot of times people come to my office after they already have tax problems, after they're already kind of in a bad situation. So if you can measure your business with a good bookkeeping service, know exactly what your goals are, and you'll basically have the financial information to make those decisions. So I urge you to get a service like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been our proud privilege to present to you the best of the best. But what we encourage you to do is to get the contact information from these professionals, but also the people that's next to you. Sometimes you never know who's sitting next to you that could be that trigger to take your business to the next level. Just since being here this morning, I've probably made a list of about 8 people that I'm already going to connect. So that's the power of these type sessions. Again, I'd like to take time to thank Andrew Frazier for putting this event together. It's always phenomenal. We meet some great people. There's some great relationships that I've been fortunate to have out of this group as well. And so with that, that concludes our segment here. And should you want to know where your business is, talk to these people. Just give yourself that.